Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unleashed the Podcast, episode number 8. I am live streaming again because I have a terrific guest today, a longtime friend. Her name is Betsy Jordan. You're going to learn a lot more about Betsy here very soon. But I want to make sure everybody knows that this is our live stream version on my Facebook page on Whedon Unleashed on Facebook. It's episode 8. Unleash the Podcast is up and percolating, and you need to make sure you never miss an episode. And the best way to do that, the very best way to do that is to subscribe. And here's where you can subscribe. You can subscribe on iTunes. You can find us on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You go there, you subscribe, you give me a 5 rating. I'm grateful forever. See, it's a win-win, right? Everybody, it's a win-win. You can also go to unleashedthepodcast.com, takes you to my website, and from there, just follow the instructions, listen, enjoy, all of that good stuff. But enough of this nonsense. We've got to get talking with one of my great longtime friends, Betsy Jordan. Betsy, and I'm going to read this correctly. Here, look, I've known Betsy for about 10 years. Are we right, Betsy? Has it been about 10 or 11 years we've known each other?
It's been 11 years, frighteningly enough.
11 years ago, we met out of a consulting group, and over the years, we've been collaborated, we've commiserated, and we've been great friends. And so Betsy is a former organizational consultant. She may talk about her time in Disney and wearing the Mickey Mouse ears, maybe, I don't know, but I know she was at Disney for years. She became an organizational consultant, and today she does a really, really terrific job as a messaging positioning strategist. A messaging positioning strategist for consultants and coaches. She's known as the brand whisperer. And the messaging and positioning, that's going to be really an important part of what we talk today, because our topic is, I just moved it. Where did I move? Oh, here we go. See, live podcasting, live TV, the role of business and social justice. And there's some messaging and there's some propositions around that, but we're going to have a kind of a deep conversation. We find ourselves in an incredibly challenging time, at least for me, in how we're dealing with social justice. And is there a role in business? So Betsy, first of all, welcome. Thanks for being my guest today. I am thrilled that you're here. And before we dive into today's topic, talk a little bit, no telling stories on me, but talk a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
That's such a big open-ended. Well, first off, Dan, thank you so much for having me here. So I've been a consultant for over 20 years. So I got my start when I was working for this nonprofit organization, and I would walk around and I would be super confused because, I'm youthful, idealistic, and it's like, I don't get it. Like the company would say one thing and what they do is something else. And this mismatch is like, well, that just can't be. So I went to school and I got a master's in organization development. So I started there, and then I went to Disney for about 8.5 years. And so as I go to different organizations, you keep coming up against the same challenges around values, culture, environment. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of the clients that I work with, we all care about the same thing, is that there has to be a better way. So I did that for a while, and then I realized, it's like I'm consulting and I love my business and all, but I'm at a point in my career where it's time for me to pass on to the next generation. So I pivoted my business to doing more mentoring. And I think where my sweet spot is I'm always that person who is called when people are at crossroads trying to figure out, like, how do I take like all of this experience and this career and turn it into my own brand. So that's where I've really started focusing my efforts. But I started to recognize, as it relates even to the social justice thing, is there's a connection, if you will, between what we enact in an organization and what goes on inside of somebody. That everybody wants to create more alignment and everything. Everybody wants to create more of like, who I am is matching what I do. And that's the same thing with an organization. So I sort of see these parallels, but I think the heart for social justice and creating these environments, never really went away. It's sort of like behind the scenes constantly, and everything that everything that I do with my clients is I'm in that place where they can speak power and be able to influence that kind of change. So
oh, that's
I don't know if that.
Oh, that's perfect. It's a great segue because it got me to contact you and say, I want you on my podcast. Is I saw something you wrote on Facebook that caught my attention. And I've been doing a lot more writing, especially in social media and blogging, about how this has affected me, how this whole racial justice affected. I'd like to talk to you about, though, specifically, is that role in business, because we've seen lately companies talk about taking cancer or having a mission or some diversity and inclusion, and we've seen a lot of things happening in the athletic world. I guess my lead question on to you is, what difference now where business is now taking more of a lead role past, at least from a historical perspective, we're both history majors, it seemed like it was more of a grassroots things that businesses, they didn't want to get involved with this. They didn't want to make comments. It was almost as if it was taboo. Is there a shift? Am I noticing that correctly? Is there a shift? And how do you see this playing out?
Well, I mean, I don't mean to sound cynical when I say this, is that business is responding to what's going on in the market. Business always responds to the market. So right now, a couple of years ago, the taking the knee and all the controversy around that, business wouldn't touch it worth it, at all, because there wasn't a readiness. I think that what's happened with George Floyd is that as a society, we're at a tipping point to say, all right, we're done. You take that, add Me Too, add the pandemic, you add all these other things, and people are saying, we're done. And so societal changes is forcing businesses to change, but that doesn't mean that businesses didn't always need to look at it. We need to take a step back and say, what is justice? What is justice? And then you get all of the different arenas around, where does this even get enacted? If you were justice is that when there's respect, appreciation, and value for every part of a system, say for the sake of argument, that's a working title. So you need to look at a community system, a government system, and together, all the systems kind of work together. So businesses always had a need to enact social justice, where capitalism has been to say, listen, there's more than the bottom line. We need to look at all the stakeholders, all the shareholders. There's the employees, there's the customers, there's all these different people, and all of these different areas need to work together. Like, you can label any organization dysfunction as the different parts of the system aren't working together. Every single one of them, the root cause of all of them is that. When you get the right hand, left hand, what they're doing, are they actually working with competing priorities and all that kind of stuff. So businesses always had a need to look at it. Conscious capitalism has come out as looking at that opportunity. But I think in today's scenario is all of this is now at a tipping point, is that we must have these conversations. It's not like, gee, it would be nice, or if we can get to that place, there's an urgency and it must happen. Companies are being forced to reconsider our culture. And how are we operating? And do we have a corporate culture and environment that not just recruits people, but creates the environment where everybody can really do their best work as are their true human personhood?
So let's do a little training, because you started with George Floyd, and certainly that seems to have been kind of one of the trigger points around racial justice, but social justice is bigger than that. So is diversity and inclusion. My last guest that I had on my show, we talked about gender neutral language. That's part of social justice. Can you talk a little bit about the intertwining of this, and maybe part of it are getting lost as companies are talking about diversity? You hate to think that it stops at the racial part. There's actually a larger thing going on. I hate to use the word thing, but I can't think of anything. There's actually a larger issue at stake, right?
I think that the movement is all the same, is that if you're looking at all of the different people groups or groups in general that feel like that there's a disparity of some kind, that they're all caused by the same kind of scenario, is that a world that we all inherited, we're set up to have this particular group of power at the top, and then the others do not necessarily have the right. So we're kind of in this place where we're trying to level the playing field for the whole kit and caboodle, which requires a culture change. When you think about the culture of business, businesses was created by white men for white men in a certain period, and now people are trying to find their place. So it's very difficult to be a woman in corporate environments because the way cultures are set up is it's not always supportive of that style. And then you look at different types of sexual orientation, and then you look at all of the other racial layers. They're all part of the same dynamic to say, how do we reframe corporate culture and what is professional that's more inclusive of the entire? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And one of the things you and I talked about as we were kind of preparing for this podcast is that, and maybe correct me if I misheard you, but one of the unfortunate things is that there are several different groups that are all trying to gain greater equality, but they're not working together. Everybody's kind of I hate to use the word siloed, but I'll use the word siloed. They're somewhat siloed in, and the problem is that one group may have a larger voice at a certain time.
Yes.
Right. So expand on that.
So, I guess if I had it on my way of saying, all right, now, how would an organization kind of broaden the values? Is I think first up, there needs to be a different leadership competency that hasn't been invented, which is really not just around diversity and inclusion, but kind of that broader social justice perspective. That looking at it from a standpoint around, do we respect the rights and the dignity of all the constituents that are around us? And if you were going to have that sort of label, it would be looking at it not just from the gender, race, or sexual orientation kind of label, but even looking at the animals and the environment and any other kind of thing where we're looking at that power over leadership style, and we're looking at a power with kind of thing. And we need to have a leadership competency that would lead to a culture that says we respect and appreciate and value the system, that ultimately social justice will be enacted by a leader at the helm who makes decisions on behalf of the realm, and that they think about their realm more broadly. That it's not just about short-term profitability, it's about serving the entire realm. That would be a place to start. So I don't think it's necessarily about advocating for all of these separate things. I think we need to advocate for one thing, and that is a transformation around how leaders lead and the decision-making filters. Where we'll create the change is when the leader has a default position, when the senior leaders at the top and everybody who's sitting around and they're making all these decisions, that they have a default of truly respecting, appreciating, and valuing their entire system. When you look at my favorite example of what a great leader looks like in terms of social justice is Simba from The Lion King. So if you look at the difference,
I knew Disney was going to get in here a little bit. I knew it. That's okay.
So you look at the difference between, Scar and his leadership style, and you look at Simba and what eventually happened with Simba. Is that what social justice looks like is what happened when Simba, at the end of the movie, walks up to take his place at Pride Rock, and you see all of the animals in harmony with one another. And Simba, this, wise and humble king, who will make decisions that benefit the entire circle of life, if you will, or all the animals on the savannah, versus Scar, who's that power over leader, who's making decisions that would benefit a few. That's what we're trying to make that transformation is we have systems in place that benefit a few. We need to have leaders that will make decisions that benefit the realm. And so wherever these leaders find themselves, whether they're in government or whether they're in charge of a business, a civic organization, a church, a religious organization of any kind, all of those leaders need to think more broadly. So that's that first part. If you're going to think about what does it look like, it goes in the mind of that particular leader. How are we influencing the decisions, and how do they make decisions? That's where social justice is going to be made. It's not going to be in the policies.
Okay, so you bring me to a great another segue, and I want to give you a case study. So somebody listening to this says, yeah, that's all fine for those people who are running large corporations. They've got all these people and these places and processes. I'm a small business owner. I have 25 employees. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're trying everything we can do to survive. And I'm also supposed to try to think about this. I don't have time. I don't have bandwidth. How would someone like that say it's important? I get what Betsy's saying. How do you start with a small business in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a crisis, trying to deal with all of that? Are there some small bite-sized steps that some of these small business owners can start taking right now?
So my thought on this is, and I've thought a lot since everything's come to the surface, and as you mentioned, like the trigger point that a lot of us have been going into some sort of reflection, because everybody really wants to make a difference and everybody doesn't know necessarily what they're supposed to do. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, is each person just needs to do something with the realm that they're in charge of, that they don't need to look at it beyond that in terms, or they could look beyond that, but it's really just starting where you are. If I was full-time at home with my kids, I have to look at that particular realm, and then you broaden it out and you brought it out. I think if I was talking to a small business owner, I would say it's just widen your filters around how you make decisions. Like let the messages that you're hearing and the new awareness transform your decision-making filters. So if you're a small business owner and you want to make a bigger difference, just think about your business practices. Are they supporting the environment? Are they being ecologically friendly? Are you making choices on suppliers and where you're getting your resources from? Are those suppliers using humane practices? That kind of thing. You could just start from there. When you look at your hiring practices, are you asking the people who are in charge of decisions to broaden their decision-making filters around what kind of candidates they're looking at? Are you challenging your leaders to open your mind on resumes that you might have overlooked? Are you considering that? It's really around changing your perception so you can make different decisions. It's not around we all have to get like in a frenzied busy state, because I think that that's what I worry about is we're going to take this as a moment of time. Everybody's going to try to do something because they want to be on the right side of history. But rather than looking at this as a sustained change, sustained change happen when decision-making filters are different. So take in the messages and take in the awareness, take it in and say, you know what, there's systemic racism and now we see it. And I want to be a part of the solution starting with my small business of 25 people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge the values that I use by which I make decisions. I'm going to think about my promotional strategies. I'm going to train my people to think more broadly. We are going to take in the messages from all the different things that have come out over the past several years around the equity issues and say, we're going to take it all in and we're just going to use it to raise our awarenesses. We're going to almost go up the elevator and get a wider perspective and make those decisions from that perspective. And if you can do that, then it will start changing. But it doesn't mean that every single person has to become a political advocate and activist. You are in your own realm. I've been thinking a lot about what I would say to consultants and coaches and what is your role. So it's just kind of going what's your role, and start with your role, have the awareness, use your own platform.
So I want to kind of I could talk to you probably all day, but people don't listen to podcasts all day. So I want to kind of transition into the kind of a conclusion with this thought, because I'm going to stick with the small business owner. That's a lot of whom I work with. And I want you to speak to this from an organizational standpoint and from your work as a consultant. There's a certain amount of vulnerability that's required, and there's a certain amount of fear for a business owner to say, well, if I'm taking any kind of stand, making any kind of shift, making any kind of comments, will I alienate someone? How will I, what's the cost benefit of this? And there's a certain amount of fear and vulnerability in taking that next step, and actually saying, even if it's deep with it, even if it's I want to do this, but that little word "but" creeps in there. Can you talk a little bit about the vulnerability, the fear, and the leadership and courage it takes to start making some of these strides?
I think that that's like a given in any time you move into your authentic space, in some ways, is anytime you really want to put your own message out there and your own position, there's always that threat um of rejection. But it just take that and multiply it by a bazillion, and when you wade into this kind of space, that definitely makes sense that there's a lot more of that fear. I think that the idea is that you live by your values. Like, so when you think about your business and you say my business stands for this, whatever that business value is, and you make decisions according to that value, over the long term it's going to pay off for you. So if you're going to make a decision to say, I'm not going to work with these kind of vendors because, even though I could save more money, and you say, I'm going to stand by my value, it still always works for the long term. That is what integrity is. And if you're going to say, well, here's my value, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to speak out in the same way with every little bit of platform. It would be within your own environment and your own area. And if your platform gets bigger, then you have a wider audience. I'm not going to say you're probably not going to turn some people off, but the reality is you're going to attract a whole lot more people who share your values. And the more clients that you can have, or more customers that you could have that share your values, the more likely those people are going to become your raving fans. So you're going to be able to maybe turn off some of your other customers who probably didn't love you in the first place, but you're going to attach the people who do love you in a much more strong, meaningful way. I've lost customers, I've lost clients since I've started speaking out, but the ones that I have, I've attracted other people. Like I've attracted I've had amazing people call me because I had the stance. Like you and I are having this conversation because I spoke out about what I believe. So I'd rather repel the wrong people. This is the same thing that they would say around email lists. Like if people unsubscribe to your email, you should be thrilled because they're not your people, and you could say, be warm, be filled. I bless you on your journey, and attract the ones that will love you. And if anytime you are in integrity with your values, you will be far more successful over the long run. And you and I both know that that's true. That's why I do all the brand messaging and positioning, is be in alignment with who you are, because that's your strongest platform. That's your strongest source of success.
You know what? And that is fantastic advice, because in the end, we are who we are, and our business should mirror whom we are. And I love that. I'm going to ask you to let everybody know how they can reach you. If they're one of the people that you've just, they've been attracted to you because of what your message is, how would they find you?
Very easy. You can just go to www.betsydordan.com and you can find me on my website. I got a boatload of blogs and videos and tutorials. You could also find me on YouTube as well. I think that those are the two.
I will have it written across, scrolling across here.
Oh yeah.
For those listening, it's Jordyn.
That's correct, because there's a different Betsy Jordan who's gotten all kinds of my email and my traffic. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Well, Betsy, thank you for joining us. Real quick things before we end. I have just come out. It was just yesterday that I promoted. Yesterday, I guess when you listen to this, who knows when that'll be. But on September the 3rd, I promoted a new scholarship mentoring program that I'm doing for BIPOC entrepreneurs. It's Black, Indigenous, people of color. I would recommend, I won't go through it right now, but I'd recommend you go to my website, danweeden.com. And if you go / equity-unleashed, you'll find it. Equity-unleashed after danweeden.com. And you can learn a little bit more about my program. I've got 3 young entrepreneurs who are already underway with it. And I'm very, very proud and thrilled with that. It's one of the ways that I feel like I can give back and promote that type of change. So listen, Unleash the podcast. Don't be a stranger. Come subscribe and listen and watch all the time. I will tell you right now, my next podcast guest is coming up next week. His name is Dean Robinson. We're going to be talking about family business. Not that anything ever dysfunctional happens in family businesses, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make that better. Until then, Betsy, again, thank you very much for having been on the show. Unleashthepodcast.com. All of you, as we head into Labor Day weekend, please be safe, be well, wear your masks, and for goodness sake, be unleashed.